Point of No Return, Tony and Ziva's Last Stand Together, NCIS, Season 24. The first explosion hit at 2:17 in the morning. For 3 seconds, the abandoned warehouse outside Washington, D.C. seemed to lift from its foundations. Glass shattered across the concrete floor, steel beams groaned overhead, and a wall of dust swallowed everything in sight. Tony DiNozzo hit the ground hard, his ears rang, his vision blurred, but only one thought mattered. Ziva. Ziva. There was no answer. Tony pushed himself up, ignoring the pain shooting through his shoulder. Smoke rolled through the warehouse as emergency lights flickered red against the darkness. Somewhere beyond the flames, automatic gunfire erupted. Then he heard it. "Tony!" Ziva's voice. He turned. She emerged through the smoke with blood running from a cut above her eyebrow, one hand gripping her weapon. Tony stared at her for half a second. "You look terrible." Ziva almost smiled. "So do you." "Good. Means we're still alive." Another burst of gunfire ripped through the metal railing behind them. They moved instantly. No discussion, no hesitation. Years apart had changed many things, but not this. Tony and Ziva still knew how to fight together. They dropped behind a concrete barrier as bullets tore through crates nearby. Tony checked his magazine. 3 rounds. Ziva had 4. 7 bullets between them. At least 8 armed men were closing in. The math was not encouraging. "We've had better odds," Tony whispered. "We have had worse." "When?" Ziva glanced at him. "I am trying to be optimistic." Tony smiled despite himself. "That's terrifying." But beneath the humor was something neither of them wanted to acknowledge. This might actually be the end. Hours earlier, NCIS had discovered that a covert intelligence network had been operating inside the United States for years. The organization had manipulated investigations, eliminated witnesses, and sold classified information to the highest bidder. Tony and Ziva had unknowingly become its greatest threat, because they possessed the one thing the network could not allow to reach NCIS headquarters: a drive containing everything: names, bank accounts, operations, government contacts, evidence capable of destroying the entire organization. The drive was hidden inside Tony's jacket, and everyone inside the warehouse wanted it. Ziva looked toward the eastern exit. 20 meters. Tony shook his head. Too exposed. The western side is burning. Also bad. The roof may collapse. Extremely bad. Ziva stared at him. "Do you have a useful observation?" Tony considered it. "We should probably stop coming to warehouses." Despite everything, Ziva laughed. It lasted barely a second. Then footsteps echoed nearby. The enemy was approaching. Tony's expression changed. The jokes disappeared. He reached inside his jacket and removed the drive. "Take it." Ziva refused. "No." Ziva. "No. If one of us gets out, both of us get out." Tony looked at her. She knew exactly what he was thinking. Years ago, they might have accepted sacrifice as part of the job. They had both spent too much of their lives believing survival was something they owed other people instead of themselves. But now there was Tali, their daughter, their reason to come home. Tony lowered his voice. "She cannot lose both of us." Ziva's eyes hardened. "She will not." A shadow moved behind the crates. Ziva fired. One shot. A man dropped. Tony immediately fired toward another attacker moving from the opposite direction. 6 bullets left, then 5, then 4. They moved toward the eastern exit. Tony covered Ziva. Ziva covered Tony. Every movement was instinctive. Years of history condensed into seconds. Paris, Cairo, Washington, safe houses, hospital rooms, arguments, reunions, goodbyes. Every road had somehow led them here. Suddenly, a bullet struck the steel beam beside Tony. He stumbled. Ziva grabbed him. "Tony!" "I'm fine." Blood was spreading across his sleeve. "You are shot." "Technically grazed." "You are bleeding." "I've had worse dates." Ziva pulled him behind another barrier. Her face changed as she examined the wound. Tony noticed. "Hey." She looked at him. "No tragic goodbye speech," he said. "I was not going to give one." "You had the face." "What face?" "The goodbye face." Ziva grabbed his jacket. You are not dying here. Something in her voice silenced him. Tony placed his hand over hers. I know. For a moment, the war around them disappeared. There had been too many years when they could not say what they wanted. Too many opportunities lost because fear, duty, distance, and timing had always interfered. Not anymore. I love you, Tony said. Ziva stared at him. There was no joke afterward, no attempt to hide behind humor, just truth. I love you too. An explosion shook the warehouse again. Reality returned. Ziva checked her weapon. 2 rounds. Tony had 1. 3 bullets. 6 enemies remained. Then a voice echoed from the darkness. Dinozo! David! The attackers stopped firing. A man stepped onto the upper walkway. Adrian Kessler, former intelligence officer, architect of the network, the man responsible for hunting them across 3 countries. You have nowhere left to go, Kessler called. Tony looked around. Fire behind them. Gunmen ahead. Collapsed walls on both sides. For once, the villain had a point. Kessler continued, Give me the drive, and your daughter keeps her parents. Ziva's expression became ice. Mentioning Tali was his mistake. Tony slowly looked at Ziva. She looked back. Neither spoke. They did not need to. Tony reached into his jacket. Kessler smiled. Smart decision. Tony raised the drive. You want this? Put it on the floor. Tony nodded. Sure. Then he threw it, not toward Kessler, toward the flames. Every gunman turned instinctively. Ziva moved first. 2 shots. 2 men fell. Tony fired his final round. A 3rd attacker dropped. Then they ran. Kessler screamed for his men to stop them. Tony and Ziva crashed through a side door as bullets followed them into the night. They reached the loading yard. A black SUV was parked 50 yards away. Freedom, almost. Kessler emerged behind them. He raised his weapon. Ziva turned. Her gun was empty. Tony had nothing. Kessler smiled. This is where it ends. Tony stepped beside Ziva. No. Ziva looked at him. Tony took her hand. This is where we stop running. Kessler aimed directly at them. Then headlights exploded across the loading yard. Vehicles surrounded the warehouse. Federal agents poured out. Kessler froze. A familiar voice thundered across the yard. Federal agents, drop your weapon. McGee. Kessler looked from the agents to Tony and Ziva. Confusion crossed his face. The drive. Tony smiled. You really thought I'd carry the only copy? Kessler's expression collapsed. McGee's team had received the files 20 minutes earlier. The warehouse mission had never been about protecting the evidence. It had been about keeping Kessler occupied long enough for NCIS to expose his entire network. Kessler slowly dropped his weapon. Tony exhaled. Ziva leaned against him. The nightmare was finally over. Hours later, dawn broke over Washington. Tony and Ziva stood outside NCIS headquarters. No weapons, no enemies, no running, just morning sunlight. Tony looked at Ziva. So, Paris? Ziva smiled. Tali is waiting. Then Paris. They started walking. After several steps, Ziva stopped. Tony turned. What? She reached for his hand. Tony smiled and intertwined his fingers with hers. For years, their lives had been defined by departures. This time was different. They were not walking away from each other. They were walking toward the same future. Whatever waited beyond that horizon, they would face it together. Because Tony Dinozo and Ziva David had finally reached the point of no return. And for once, neither of them wanted to turn back. Point of no return, Tony and Ziva's last stand together. NCIS Season 24, Part 2. Tony and Ziva never made it to Paris. They were less than 10 minutes from the airport when Tony's phone vibrated. Once, then twice, then 3 times. Tony glanced at the screen. McGee. Ziva noticed the change in his expression immediately. Answer it. Tony hesitated. We promised Tali. Tony, he answered. McGee, whatever this is, I'm officially retired for at least the next. Do not go to the airport. Tony stopped talking. McGee's voice was low and urgent. Turn around. Now. Ziva leaned closer. What happened? There was silence on the other end. Then McGee said something that erased every trace of humor from Tony's face. Kessler is dead. Tony slowly looked at Ziva. What? 23 minutes ago. He was being transferred to a secure holding facility. The convoy route was classified. Tony tightened his grip on the phone. How many people knew the route? 6. And? 5 are accounted for. Tony understood immediately. One person was missing. One person who knew exactly where Kessler would be. One person who had access to classified NCIS operations. The nightmare was not over. It had simply moved closer. Much closer. Tony ended the call. Ziva was already turning the car around. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Tony looked through the windshield. Tali. She is safe, Ziva said. We thought Kessler was the threat. He was. No, he was part of the threat. Ziva's jaw tightened. Tony knew that expression. Fear disguised as determination. They had both believed that destroying Kessler's network would finally give them something resembling a normal life. Now someone inside NCIS had murdered him before he could talk. Someone powerful, someone desperate, and possibly someone they trusted. When Tony and Ziva arrived at NCIS headquarters, the atmosphere felt different. Agents moved through the bullpen, but conversations stopped as Tony passed. Security had doubled. Doors that normally remained open were locked. McGee waited upstairs. Parker stood beside him. Torres paced near the conference room. Knight was checking information on a tablet. Tony entered. Tell me everything. Parker closed the door. The convoy was hit at 6:42 this morning. Professional operation, 2 vehicles boxed them in. Communications were jammed for 90 seconds. Kessler? Single gunshot. Ziva folded her arms. Execution. Parker nodded. The attackers ignored everyone else. Tony looked toward McGee. And the missing person? McGee pulled up a photograph. Deputy Director Nathan Mercer. Tony recognized him. Mercer had been with NCIS for nearly 20 years, decorated, respected, trusted with some of the agency's most sensitive operations. Tony shook his head. Too obvious. Torres stopped pacing. You think he was framed? I think someone capable of running an international intelligence network probably knows how to make one guy look guilty. Ziva studied the photograph. Where is Mercer? No one knows, Knight replied. His phone is off. His car was found near Alexandria. Tony stared at the screen. Something bothered him. Mercer disappearing at exactly the same time Kessler was murdered was convenient. Too convenient. Show me the convoy route. McGee brought up the map. Tony studied it. 3 intersections, 1 tunnel, 2 possible escape routes. Then Ziva pointed at the screen. There. Everyone looked. What? Torres asked. The tunnel. McGee zoomed in. Ziva continued. If I wanted to kill Kessler without being seen, I would attack inside the tunnel. Parker nodded. No traffic cameras. Exactly. Tony understood where she was going. But they waited until after the tunnel. Ziva looked at him. Yes. Tony smiled faintly. So they wanted cameras. McGee immediately started pulling footage. The attack had been designed to leave evidence. That meant the evidence itself was the trap. Several minutes later, footage appeared on the screen. A dark SUV. Another vehicle behind it. McGee froze the image. Knight leaned forward. Can you enhance that? He did. The license plate became visible. Torres read it aloud. Government vehicle. McGee searched the number. Then his face went pale. Tony noticed. McGee? Tim turned toward him. The vehicle belongs to NCIS. Silence. Not stolen. Not fake. An official agency vehicle had participated in Kessler's assassination. Parker immediately ordered the building locked down. Nobody entered. Nobody left. Tony looked around the room. The possibility they had been avoiding was now unavoidable. The enemy was inside the building. 3 floors below them, an elevator opened. A man stepped out, gray suit, NCIS identification badge, calm expression. He walked through security without hesitation. Nobody stopped him. Nobody suspected him. and inside the briefcase in his right hand was enough explosive material to destroy half the building. Upstairs, Ziva suddenly froze. Tony noticed. What? She looked toward the door. I do not know. That's never comforting. Ziva ignored him. Her instincts were screaming. Something was wrong. Then the lights went out. The building fell into darkness. Emergency alarms activated. Parker reached for his weapon. Everybody stay where you are. A massive explosion shook the lower floors. Windows shattered. The conference room door slammed open from the pressure wave. Tony grabbed Ziva and pulled her down. Smoke poured through the hallway. People screamed below. McGee! Parker shouted. I'm good! Torres kicked open the emergency stairwell. We need to move! But Ziva remained still. She was staring through the smoke. Someone was standing at the far end of the corridor. A silhouette. Tony saw him too. The man raised a weapon. Down! Tony tackled McGee as gunfire tore through the conference room. Parker fired back. The attacker disappeared. Ziva immediately pursued him. Ziva! Tony followed. They ran through the smoke-filled hallway. The attacker entered the stairwell. Ziva was only seconds behind. She reached the landing. Empty. Then something struck her from behind. Ziva fell. Her weapon slid across the floor. The attacker grabbed her and pressed a blade against her throat. Tony reached the doorway. He froze. The man pulled Ziva upright. Tony finally saw his face, and everything inside him stopped. He knew him, not from Kessler's files, not from some old investigation. From NCIS, Special Agent Daniel Cross, a man Tony had worked with years ago, a man who had attended memorial services for fallen agents, a man who had once sat beside Tony at Gibbs's desk and joked about surviving another impossible case. Cross smiled. Anthony. Tony stared at him. Danny. Ziva remained perfectly still. The blade rested against her throat. Cross looked older now, colder. You should have gone to Paris. Tony slowly raised his hands. You know me. Never been great at following travel plans. Still making jokes. Still holding knives to people you shouldn't. Cross tightened his grip around Ziva. Tony's smile vanished. What do you want? Cross looked directly into his eyes. The real drive. Tony said nothing. Cross smiled. You didn't send everything to McGee. Ziva looked at Tony. Even she had not known. Cross continued. Kessler kept one file separate, a list of every government official working for us. You found it. Tony's expression gave nothing away. Cross moved the blade closer to Ziva's throat. You have 10 seconds. Tony reached slowly toward his jacket. Ziva immediately understood. No. Cross began counting. 10. Tony reached deeper. 9. Ziva stared at him. Tony, do not. 8. Tony pulled out a small black drive. Cross smiled. There it is. Tony held it between two fingers. You let her go. Give it to me. Her first. Cross laughed. You still think you're negotiating. Tony looked at Ziva. Something passed between them. A silent understanding. The kind that had saved their lives countless times. Tony dropped the drive. Cross instinctively looked down. Ziva moved. She slammed her elbow into his ribs, twisted his wrist, and drove him into the railing. The knife fell. Tony charged forward. Cross recovered faster than expected. He struck Tony across the face and grabbed his weapon. Ziva kicked his arm. The gun fired. The bullet struck the stairwell window. Cross stumbled backward. For 1 second, all three froze. Then the damaged railing behind Cross snapped. He fell. His hand caught the edge. Tony rushed forward and grabbed his wrist. Cross dangled several floors above the lobby. Ziva stared down. Cross looked up at Tony. You have no idea what you've uncovered. Tony struggled to hold him. Then tell me. Cross smiled. Kessler wasn't running the network. Tony's face changed. Who was? Cross looked toward Ziva, then back at Tony. You already know him. Suddenly, Cross released Tony's hand. No. He fell. The sound below echoed through the stairwell. Tony stood frozen. Ziva slowly approached him. He chose that. Tony stared downward. He said, I know the person running it. Ziva's expression darkened. Before Tony could say anything else, his phone vibrated. Unknown number. A message appeared. 6 words. You should have taken the flight. Then another message arrived. A photograph. Tony opened it. His blood turned cold. It showed Tali, taken less than 5 minutes earlier. She was standing outside their Paris home, unaware that someone was watching her. Ziva saw the photograph. For the first time that morning, genuine terror appeared in her eyes. Tony looked at her. The conspiracy was no longer about NCIS. It was no longer about Kessler. It was no longer about the drive. Someone had just threatened their daughter, and whoever had done it had made the biggest mistake of their life. Tony closed his fist around the phone. Ziva picked up her weapon. Neither needed to say what came next. They were going to Paris, but this time they were not running from the enemy. They were hunting them. Point of no return. Tony and Ziva's last stand together. NCIS Season 24, Part 3. Paris looked peaceful from 30,000 feet. Tony knew better. He sat beside Ziva in the private aircraft, staring at the photograph on his phone for what felt like the 100th time. Tali, standing outside their home. Someone had been close enough to photograph her, close enough to hurt her. That thought was eating him alive. Across from him, Ziva checked her weapon again. Tony watched her. She had barely spoken since leaving Washington. That frightened him more than anger would have. Ziva. Nothing. Ziva. She finally looked up. We're going to find whoever did this. Yes. And Tali is going to be okay. Ziva's expression remained controlled. You cannot promise that. Tony leaned forward. No, but I can promise what happens to anyone who tries to make it untrue. For a moment, Ziva said nothing. Then she reached across the narrow space between them and took his hand. Neither needed another word. The plane landed outside Paris shortly before midnight. McGee had arranged transportation and a secure communication channel. Officially, Tony and Ziva were operating outside NCIS authority. Unofficially, nobody intended to stop them. A message from McGee appeared on Tony's phone. No activity at your house. French authorities are watching from a distance. Tali is still inside. Tony showed Ziva. She immediately headed for the car. 25 minutes later, they reached their neighborhood. Everything looked normal. Streetlights, parked cars, darkened windows, a couple walking beneath an umbrella. But Tony noticed something. A black sedan, 2 streets away, engine running. Ziva noticed it at exactly the same moment. Do not look directly at it, she whispered. Wasn't planning on waving. They continued toward the house. The sedan remained stationary. Tony's phone vibrated. Unknown number. Welcome home. Tony stopped. Ziva saw the message. They are watching us. Good. Ziva looked at him. Tony slipped the phone into his pocket. Now we know they're here. They entered through the rear door. Tony called quietly. Tali? Footsteps came from upstairs. Then a familiar voice. Dad? Tony exhaled. Tali appeared at the top of the staircase. The second she saw her parents, she ran down. Tony caught her. For several seconds, he simply held her. Ziva wrapped her arms around both of them. The mission disappeared. The conspiracy disappeared. Nothing existed except their daughter. You came back, Tali whispered. Tony closed his eyes. Always. Ziva kissed her forehead. Are you hurt? No. Did anyone speak to you? Follow you? Tali shook her head. Then she remembered something. There was a man. Tony and Ziva exchanged a look. What man? Tony asked. Yesterday. Tali pointed toward the front window. He stood across the street. Ziva crouched beside her. What did he look like? Tali thought. Older. Gray hair. Tony felt something tighten in his chest. Anything else? He had a cane. Ziva froze. Tony saw it. You know someone. Ziva slowly stood. No. But Tony knew her too well. Ziva. She turned away. Who? Ziva stared through the window. Finally, she spoke. Eli. Tony said nothing. Ziva immediately corrected herself. Not my father, Someone who worked with him. A name surfaced from somewhere deep in her memory. Raphael Ben-Ami. Tony waited. He was Mossad. Was? He disappeared 17 years ago. Everyone assumed he was dead. Tony looked toward the street. Apparently, death isn't as permanent as advertised. Ziva's expression hardened. Ben-Ami trained intelligence officers. He knew my father. He knew Ari. And you? Yes. Tony understood. This conspiracy had roots far deeper than NCIS. His phone rang. McGee. Tony answered. Tell me you found something. I found something. Tony activated speakerphone. McGee continued. I searched Cross's financial records. He received payments through shell companies connected to Kessler, but those companies all trace back to one organization. What organization? McGee hesitated. The Atlas Foundation. Ziva's eyes widened. Tony noticed. Another familiar name? The Atlas Foundation funded intelligence operations in Europe during the early 2000s, Ziva said. Officially humanitarian, unofficially espionage. Yes, McGee continued. There's more. One person served as an advisor to Atlas for almost 15 years. Tony already knew the answer. Raphael Ben-Ami. Silence. Then McGee said, How did you know? Tony looked at Ziva. Long story. Suddenly the lights went out. Tali gasped. Tony immediately pulled her behind him. Ziva drew her weapon. Outside, the black sedan began moving. Slowly. Toward the house. Tony whispered to Tali. Remember the safe room? She nodded. Go. But now. Tali ran upstairs. Ziva moved toward the front window. The sedan stopped. One door opened, then another. 4 men stepped onto the street. Tony checked his weapon. This feels familiar. Ziva looked at him. Warehouse? Warehouse. The front window shattered. Gunfire erupted. Tony and Ziva dropped. Bullets ripped through the walls. Ziva fired twice through the broken window. One attacker fell. Tony moved toward the kitchen. Another man entered through the rear. Tony slammed him into the wall. The attacker swung a knife. Tony caught his wrist. They struggled. The blade moved dangerously close. Then Ziva appeared. One kick. The attacker collapsed. Tony looked at her. I had him. Of course. Another explosion shook the front of the house. Smoke filled the hallway. Tony grabbed Ziva. Upstairs. They moved toward Tali. Then a voice came through the darkness. Ziva, David. She stopped. Tony turned. A man stood in the destroyed doorway. Gray hair. Cane. Raphael Ben-Ami. He looked at Ziva almost affectionately. You have become exactly what Eli feared. Ziva aimed her weapon. Stay away from my family. Ben-Ami smiled. Your family is why I am here. Tony raised his gun. That's generally not something you say while breaking into someone's house. Ben-Ami ignored him. Eli discovered Atlas years before his death. He tried to destroy us. Ziva's face changed. My father knew? He knew everything. Then why did he not tell me? Because he knew what you would do. Ziva stepped closer. And what is that? Exactly what you are doing now. Ben-Ami reached inside his coat. Tony immediately aimed higher. Slowly. Ben-Ami removed a small envelope. He tossed it onto the floor. Ziva stared at it. What is that? Something your father left behind? Nobody moved. Finally, Tony picked it up. Inside was an old photograph. Eli, David, Raphael Ben-Ami, and a third man. Tony stared at the third face. His stomach dropped. No. Ziva took the photograph. Her reaction was immediate, because the third man was someone they both recognized, someone connected to NCIS, someone who had known Gibbs, someone who had known Tony, someone who had known Ziva. Ben-Ami smiled. Now you understand. Tony looked at him. Understand what? Kessler was disposable. Cross was disposable. Even I am disposable. Ziva tightened her grip on the photograph. Who is running Atlas? Ben-Ami looked directly at Tony. The man who has been watching both of you since the beginning. A red laser suddenly appeared on Ben-Ami's chest. Tony saw it. Down! A gunshot exploded from somewhere outside. Ben-Ami collapsed. Ziva rushed toward him. Blood spread across his shirt. "Who?" she demanded. "Tell me who?" Ben-Ami struggled to breathe. His eyes moved toward the photograph, then toward Tony. "He knows everything." His body went still. Tony moved toward the window. The sniper was already gone. Sirens echoed in the distance. Ziva remained beside Ben-Ami. Tony looked again at the photograph. Something was written on the back. 3 words. He turned it over. "Trust no one." Then Tony noticed something else. A number. An NCIS case number. Tony immediately called McGee. "Tim, I need you to pull an old case." "How old?" 20 years. Tony read the number. Silence followed. Then McGee's voice changed. "Tony?" "What?" "That file is classified above my clearance." Tony looked at Ziva. "Who classified it?" McGee typed. Several seconds passed. Then he stopped. "You're not going to believe this." Tony's grip tightened around the phone. "Try me." The authorization came directly from Director Vance's office. Ziva slowly stood. Tony stared at her. Neither spoke. They knew that did not prove Vance was involved, but it changed everything. Someone inside the highest levels of NCIS had buried a secret connecting Eli David, Atlas, and the conspiracy hunting their family. Tony looked upstairs toward Tali's safe room. He had spent years believing the most dangerous part of his life was behind him. He had been wrong. Ziva stepped beside him. "What now?" Tony looked down at the photograph. Then he turned toward her. "We finish it." Ziva nodded. "No more running. No more hiding. And no more secrets." Tony took her hand. Outside, Paris disappeared beneath flashing emergency lights. Somewhere in the darkness, the mastermind behind Atlas believed Tony and Ziva were trapped. They were not. They had survived assassins, betrayals, separation, loss, and years of unfinished history.